Thank you, everybody who's on the Zoom, and thank you, Dr. James Johnson, for joining us today. This is our March speaker series of the 2026 year with the Cumberland County Historical Society. And today we have Dr. James Johnson, who his most recent book is Black Biographies of the Lower Delaware Valley. This is probably mirrored, apologies. Antebellum to Great Migration. Very beautiful book that we now have available for researchers at the Lummis Library. And he also writes pieces for local historical societies, including most recently From Mannington to Clayton, the interesting saga of John and Esther Fleming. That was for the Gloucester County Historical Society. And today we will listen as he talks about his book and also his upcoming work, see what's going on, what he has on the docket. So, Dr. Johnson.
Oh, it's good to be here to you, and thank you for inviting me in your speaker series. Um, my book, Black Biographies of the Lower Delaware Valley, Antebellum to Great Migration, is a culmination of several years of, well, I'd say a couple decades at least, of various persons whom I've delved into their lives, ordinary people, non-celebrities. Each one of the persons that I have depicted, these 8 individuals in this biography, um, these are seminal biographies. They aren't uh, things that I've read about these people. I've actually dug them up from the primary sources to find out who they are. And much of this has spun off from my initial work in Civil War research. And so some of these folks are the wives of soldiers. Um, uh, uh, um, we have um, Margaret Wilson, evangelist Margaret Wilson, is the wife of a soldier who was in the Fourth United States Colored Troops. Interesting story there. We have the wife, well, Henrietta Crawford herself, the probably the most well-known of the biographies. Anytime you can Google someone in any part of the world and find out who they are, you know you've made a mark. So her husband was also uh, a United States Colored Troop soldier. Um, Others, it's a couple more, I think, when I think about it. But anyway, so some of these, so it turns out that 5 of these people, I think at least, are women. 5 of the 8 are women, and which certainly is the most underrepresented of the of folks who are, you know, known in history. It's usually when we look at organizations, whether they are political organizations or even church organizations, educational organizations that are usually led by men. Um, Officially. I mean, but certainly, like in the churches, we know it's the women that really um, the pillars of the church. They're the ones who are making things happen and making sure that the men do what's supposed to do, be done, and those kinds of things in general. Um, so we have these issues, and I have been so I'm saying all of that, but so I have been like really privileged to bring women into some kind of prominence. The story I'll talk about the stories later, but let me just say this: of the 8 biographies um, that I've written, 4 of the persons were born in the Delaware Valley, and 4 migrated to the Delaware Valley. The ones that were born in the Delaware Valley, it's 4 of them. That includes Henrietta Crawford. Many folks have probably heard about her by now, uh, and if not, you will when you read the book. um, Henrietta Crawford. Also, the first story in the book is actually a biography of a woman um, uh, by the name of Margaret Haney. And Margaret Haney is one of the early residents of Lawnside, New Jersey, which is a haven for African Americans in the pre-Civil War period, in the antebellum period. Um, she was born in fact, she's the earliest born. She's born in 1804. Her father, um, she married a Haney. She married Henry Haney, but her maiden name is Stevens. Littleton Stevens was her father, who in 1797 we see him paying taxes on the tax rolls. So she's one of these early uh, 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 persons who settle in. They come from Virginia and or Maryland, I forget which, and then they migrate early. Him and his wife, and the interesting thing is, when we have to consider at this time in 1797, when he's paying taxes, at this time African Americans and women are able to vote in New Jersey as of the rights inherited by the New Jersey Constitution of 1776. One just needed to be financially able uh, to vote, which I think it had to be 50 pounds of real wealth or whatever the wealth terms were. They're not coming to mind immediately, but as long as you met those terms, there were no restrictions on color or gender. So this is in 1797. You see him paying his taxes, along with a list of other African Americans paying their taxes in 1797. So we think about, and so of course, in 1807, there's a constitutional. New Jersey has a constitutional adjustment that then eliminates women and people of color from voting and delivers it particularly to white males of age and who are able to meet the financial adjustment. That's a change in 1844, of course, when the financial adjustment is removed and you just needed to be a white male. And so we um, clock along with that until 1870 with passage of the 15th Amendment. Uh, but that's a sideways story here, but to the point that these are the circumstances in which we find the longevity of a person like Margaret Haney, who born in 1874 and lived through all of that. She passed that thing in 1876, so she saw all of that history unfold. And her son was a military veteran. Her son was a United States Colored Troops in 25th USCT. Um, but anyway, so that's Henry. Excuse me. That's and there's a street in Lawnside by the name of Henry Avenue, I think it is. Haney Avenue, excuse me, Haney Avenue. In fact, the biography talks about that. It opens with that story of Haney Avenue. How did it get that name? And the beautiful thing about that is that the Haney Street becomes popular under the guise of the what are they? The Golden Stars, folks that have lost folks in the military. One of the Golden Stars lived on Haney Street, and as a matter of fact, look. You have to read the book to see the whole story. I can't give the whole thing away, right? Anyways, it breaks it out like that. That's one of the persons that was born in the Delaware Valley. Another person born in the Delaware Valley is um, mm, Elias, Maggie Elias, the school teacher in Delaware. What a fantastic story. Her mother is born in slavery. Their parents meet. He's a free man, sees her, she's fine. He buys her. You know what I mean? And the interesting thing is, um, when he paid off the the money at that time, it's equivalent to $3,000 today. When he paid off the money, um, his wife was pregnant. That is Maggie Elias's mother was pregnant with uh, her mother was pregnant with her first sibling, and the child was born like about 30 days after her freedom was purchased. So the child was born in freedom because if it hadn't been, that child would have had to go through issues. The child would have been enslaved if he was born to an enslaved mother. And it's so you read that in the book, and it's just a fantastic thing. That's another person that's born here in the North. So who is that? Henrietta um, Haney. We have Margaret Haney, and then we have Maggie Elias, and the other person born here in uh, um, is, wait a minute, I'll tell you 1 second. When you get uh, okay, so we have Martha Haney, Maggie Elias, Henrietta Crawford, and the person is none other than the Barkis family in Bridgeton, New Jersey. And that's where we have Ezekiel Barkis, who was in the 54th Massachusetts, made that famous charge against the Confederate forces at Fort Wagner in July 1873. July 16th, 1873, and they made that charge, and you see that in the movie Glory. When you read this book, I was reading it to one of his a quote to one of his descendants who lives right there in Bridgeton today. Um, and she's a history major and all this good stuff. But anyway, I was reading this and it was recounting the battle, and it got to his name and it said survived in terms of that charge. It has that each one has a designated as to how they fared in that charge. So Ezekiel Barcus, Barcus of Bridgeton, um, who was in the 54th Massachusetts, when in fact when he enlisted. You see, the 54th Massachusetts, they are being gathered like in just before African Americans were widely accepted in the military. And so at the time that they were forming the 54th Massachusetts, it had to be done very quietly. In fact, when you read about how it was carried out, they say they had to actually um, not let anybody know that they were gathering these troops in Philadelphia to send them off to Massachusetts. Because at that time, the idea was not so welcome that black men in uniform, because it was considered to be a white man's war. So Ezekiel Barkis survives that, and 2 months later, he dies of disease, dysentery. Most black soldiers died of disease. I think that's more died of disease, I should say, than gunshot. I think that's a fair statement. I don't remember all the stats, but so he dies of disease, and he has 5 children back in Bridgeton. And then this is a story then how, in fact, our children. Here's another part of the story of the Civil War that we don't encounter. What happens when, when a wife now has become, um, charged with raising these 5 kids? And by the way, he had a thriving business in Bridgeton. He was a brickmaker. Yeah, he was a brickmaker. You have to read about that. And then I wrote a subsequent piece on that about that brickmaker, that the locating of where his brick oven was has been something that is an ongoing kind of research project to actually identify the exact location of his brick making business there. Um, but um, but his wife, who is Jane Barkis. Now we have this story of this woman here who was like faced with all that, and we have these 5 children, and then Jane died. Now we have orphans. Now we have this story to talk about, which is not usually a part of the story. because you know oftentimes it's the mom that's at the home uh, 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 carrying it forth. Even if the guy comes home alive physically, he might not be mentally alive, or he might come home physically impaired. What happens when he comes home with one leg, one arm, or worse? All of these kinds of ills that the woman has to kind of like endure. There was a piece called uh, uh, um, I, I can't remember it. It's about women and whether or not they feel the impact of war. Um, I write about that in a piece that I did, South Jersey Women of Color in the Civil War. Um, and this was an 1865 piece that was done by a woman named Fleeta, Fleeta, Fleeta. And Fleeta said, "What do women know of war?" And ultimately, it comes down to what do they not know of war? They feel that, you know, on a deep level. Anyway, so this is Jane's situation that transfers in now the story of the um, way her children were looked out for, and very well they were looked out for by this person who comes into the story. And later I learned so much about him, William Corsi, who was founder of the St. James AME Church in Millville. It's a very famous church. In fact, and he had escaped from slavery. He was, he escaped from slavery and came to Millville and built this church. Anyway, he becomes the foster parent of the Barkis children, and there's that whole story. So those are the four persons who are born in the Delaware Valley, and migrating to um, the area, we have one William Miles Butts, who comes to Camden, and he's, if not the first, he's one of the first African American police officers. In 1887, he becomes a police officer in Camden. His Civil War record. He went into the army. He was unable to read. He was from Virginia. Couldn't read, had to make an X. But by the time he came out, he could sign his name. So uh, anyway, so those are some really important things. He comes to Camden and he gets married quickly, and his wife dies of disease, and then he spends this long period involved in all kinds of political involvement with the Macedonia AME Church, primary church there in Camden. When he passed away in 1899, gee whiz, 50 police officers in Camden with his parade. Then there was a number of, oh, you just have to read about it in the book, just this massive parade that's leading him to the cemetery there. Unprecedented in terms of the numbers and the variety of organizational, political, and social organizations and church organizations and ministers who are coming from Trenton and other places to speak at his service, because William Miles Butts was something else. Um, and so that's one migrant. Another migrant is, well, I already kind of mentioned her earlier, and that's Evangelist Margaret Wilson from Baltimore. Her husband was from Baltimore. Interesting thing about her husband, I can't give this away, but it is. I'll give a little tease on his early life. He was raised in a prison as a boy. He was raised in the prison as a boy. He was the watch this. He was the ward of the warden. Okay, and telling you, look at the 1850 census, you see this 9-year-old boy in prison, and the next person under him is doing time for murder because they have it down there. That's the census of the prison. They do. I think they do like the warden's family and all that, and he's the last one mentioned, 9 years old. After that, they cut right into the population, and boom. There we go. And that's an interesting thing to kind of look at and digest. And you feel, wait a minute. At first, you wonder. I mean, at first sight, when I first came upon that, thought the guy was doing time at 9. I thought he was like somebody who was mentioned in Elias, Maggie Elias's biography. A guy they call Sugar Awful. Sugar Awful, I think his name was William Rothwell. I mean, from the time he was 9, he was doing time. All right, and when he passed away, like around 30 years old from meningitis, he was locked up. He had had so many encounters with the law that the obituary was printed in Hawaii, all across the nation, Kansas, Missouri, Texas. Sugar awful. Finally, yeah. And folks loved Sugar Awful by the time he passed because he came around and um in fact, before he was being released, just it wasn't long before be released, he got meningitis, and he had, uh, 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 rehabilitated himself and this kind of thing. He was like, and so that's uh, so anyway. But back to that, I got off on Sugar Awful because we were talking about uh, 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 evangelist Margaret Wilson's husband in his early life. His name was Luther Wilson, and he was in the Fourth United States Colored Troops over there with Christian Fleetwood was the sergeant major. I'm saying Christian Fleetwood like somebody should know that. I mean, you that's another name you can Google. Christian Fleetwood. Anyone, United States Colored Troops. Not only did he was the sergeant major of that regiment, he was significant and as a political activist in after the Civil War as well. Christian Fleetwood. Um, so Margaret Wilson, she starts early out under Daniel Payne, under Bishop. She grows up under Bishop Daniel Payne, the great AME pastor. Another name we Google a lot of these names we can Google are circling around these people. But anyway, he's the pastor of her church as she's growing up, and he was big on education. Uh, he uh, Bishop Daniel Payne. So she marries Luther right after the Civil War. I think it was 1866. They get married. I think it's 1866 they get married, and they move to Cape May. They moved to Cape May. So you find them in Cape May, I think, on the 1880 census at least, maybe the 1870. They're in Cape May, I believe it is. Then 1880, they're down by somewhere near Bridgeton area, and then in 1885, you look at the New Jersey census, you'll find them there in Franklinville. All right, and so they spend a lot of time in Franklinville. She's built all of these places now. Margaret Wilson is building churches, creating churches. Each of these, that's what she's known as. But then again, too, she's constrained by the gender ceiling that operates, and so you find she's always uh, identified as an evangelist, but never a pastor or anything of that kind of official, So, and I guess, look, she's her story brings to mind, of course, the story of, and I'm forgetting her name now. I don't want to start wandering. I'll start wandering. Let me stick to the story. So, uh, um, she, they have one child, by the way, Alexander. Interesting thing here, and here, um, I think I even touch on the fact that his mother, Alexander's mother, and oh, here, let me just say this too. On these women of these soldiers, these men had to be strong women because they had strong women. It's not a lot of men, especially in that Victorian era, who would be comfortable with their wife being the center of attention on a political or social level. Margaret Wilson's going all over, and it's Luther staying home taking care of Alexander. And you look at the newspaper, you see her here, she's there, she's sharing the days with really important people, and so she's very busy. And you wonder though, how does that play out psychologically for the child? Because watch this: when he gets married, he has 12 children, and I'm like, wow, I think it's 12. Look, it's about that. It's about that number. Um, and, I often wonder, was that some kind of like psychological kind of thing of like wanting to have siblings? And so that's an interesting kind of thing. So she yeah, passes away in 1907. By the way, then they relocate to Asbury Park. By the way, they the son, one of her son relocated to Asbury Park, uh, and his children had a lot of children. So the Wilsons really proliferate of there in Asbury Park, and but she passed just before they went there. She passed in Chislehurst, which is another place with another so she has churches. Cape May, I think she started Cape May, near Bridgeton. I can't think of a little hamlet near Bridgeton. Um, Clayton. I'm sorry, Franklinville and Chislehurst. All those different places she started churches. So that was her. So that's Margaret Wilson, and another migrant to the antebellum, excuse me, to the Delaware Valley is a person born enslaved. A person born enslaved, and that's the pastor. Uh, um, I'm having a brain freeze here. What's uh, uh, um, Dudley? I'm sorry, Dudley Gibson. Sorry about that. Dudley Gibson, um, wonderful. I just enjoyed doing the research for his biography. I learned so much about the theological schools that he went to that were so important down there in Virginia, and the struggle between African Americans trying to control the curriculum in these theological centers that had been started by white organizations. And it's interesting thing. So it's a nice kind of like conversation in there. Not only about that, we touch on the uh, early beginnings of the Baptist Church and this kind of thing. And so anyway, he by the time he by 1930 he is the preeminent Baptist pastor in Philadelphia. He's known as the dean of the pastors in Philadelphia, and uh, um, what we get here is not so much political engagement, but you get a lot of the church politics that are involved. There's a wonderful discussion on church politics, and there's even one discussion on how a particular kind of disagreement in North Philadelphia there actually had its roots in Virginia because persons on each side went to two different churches in Virginia. It's interesting when you did that research, and it's like so you have all those kinds of different things going on with church politics there, with Reverend Gibson and his church. Interestingly enough, which um, his church is Dauphin Street Baptist Church, and he passed. By the way, he passes away, I think, in 1943. But I should say that that particular church, uh, I was a Boy Scout there. My brother and I were Boy Scouts there. Troop 492, led by Luther Broadwater, and that's where we used to use the our uh, we used to use the old World War II rifles. What was they M16s? I think they what was they M16s or was that? I think they were you know uh, the models anyway. Anyway, that's so that church there. I had no idea, once I started doing these kinds of research, and anyway, because I was raised in Philadelphia, I was raised in North Philadelphia, um, and this was part of my upbringing right there. You see, so yeah, so he's there, and his wife, he meets her. She's also from Virginia, but they met in New Jersey after he came out of theology school, and then him and his wife, um, I'm blanking on her name right now, um, but she passed away from tuberculosis, something like 15 years before he did, and but that's an interesting kind of a thing going on there with him. Um, Let's see. We have I think, the fourth migrant to the Delaware Valley was actually born in Pennsylvania. And interesting story there. This is the story of a person, and her name, of course, um, we're talking about none other than Emma Norris. Emma Norris. Emma Norris, who married a gentleman. Um, he Just one second here. Let me just take 1 second here. Uh, uh, yeah, because that was okay. Monroe. Yes, she married Monroe. She married a gentleman by the name of John Monroe, in something like 1895 in Chambersburg, Maryland, which is central Pennsylvania. Um, Near let's see, Chambersburg, very famous because during the Civil War, um, it was invaded by the Confederates and partially burned and that kind of thing. Chambersburg, but at any rate, so 1895, and I should say she has an extensive background. Even before we get up to that, let me just share some background with you. Her 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 maternal her her ma- excuse me, her paternal grandfather purchased her paternal grandmother out of slavery. This is the second story in the book. We have a person being bought out of slavery, right? So her paternal grandparents came like that as well, and they're coming straight up from due south down there in Virginia and Maryland. How it gets twisted around in there, but um, so this is Emma Norris, the baby of her family. She's the youngest member of her family. She has several older brothers and sisters. One is a barber in Pittsburgh. One is a very well-known AME minister in North Philadelphia. That's how she winds up in Philadelphia. And so, anyway, her and John get married. Then they moved to a place right outside of Pittsburgh called Denora. And apparently that's not working out. They then come back, cross the state, all the way across the state. They come to Philadelphia, and there they take roots up and live with her brother right there in North Philadelphia. Really, very around the corner from the Reverend Gibson. They're like within 3 blocks of each other, right? And so what happens is in 1918, when we have uh, 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 the flu epidemic, the great flu epidemic uh, that killed so many. Um, Her son, Chalfant, little Chalfant, at 10 years old, he died. And this just destroyed her life. After that, she winds up for a brief period in a mental institution. Her marriage fails. Um, and her life just spirals. It's a story of grief, a death and dying. It's a death and dying story, um, and the area that they lived in was the area that I grew up in and knew very well. I mean, so um, there's a story that I tell at the end of that story, near the end of it, I think, about how he's playing in the backyard, and that's me playing in the backyard when I tell this story about what it is like playing in the alleys, because his next door neighbors are, they're all the same age. So I'm just anyway. That's a nice story to look at. To try to give it a kind of like ending that's um, not so dreadful. But anyway, so that story though, it's about the disease. It's about the fact that um, African Americans, interestingly enough, were not the most severely impacted population, which normally with diseases such as respiratory disease, tuberculosis, high blood pressure, cancer, all of these other diseases, and they were uh, uh, you know, more high percentage of African Americans, health wise, would be succumbing to that. And so, but in 1918, one of the most severely impacted populations was the immigrant populations from Europe. They were like really impacted most when you. I found that to be so interesting. And African Americans weren't. Some people thought that this was a sign from God and this kind of thing that got to break this time and and that kind of thing. But anyway, but that's what we're being. I mean, I'm kind of being light about it, but that's what was actually happening. Um, uh, 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 it was a shocking kind of stat. Um, and then there's the issues of why, and then there's a few papers that have been written about that. But anyway, we talk about that in detail, the disease itself and the psychology of a parent losing a child, and not only that, an only child. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, this was the second child they had lost. They had lost a child when, like a year before Shelf Hunt was born. Uh, and I found that in the newspaper. It was a newspaper they had just lost. This was their second child that they had lost, and he lost him at 10. And he was the darling of their life. He was, and at 10, then he could do no wrong probably. And then this happened, and he lingered and lingered for a few days before he passed. And so that's the fourth migrant to um, the Delaware Valley, and those are the four born and the four migrants in a short story.
I do have one question real quickly. Just to go back to what you just mentioned with the influenza and African American populations really not being as affected as you would expect, what were the reasons for that? What was so peculiar about this instance? And did it do, you mentioned in the chapter you talk about the psychology of it, of losing a child to disease, but I wonder if there was anything to go for, like, of course they feel relieved, but the idea of we've always been the ones to get hit hardest by disease, why not this one? Is it a gratitude reaction or a waiting for the other shoe to drop type reaction?
I think it's everything. It's everything depending on whose perspective is being delivered on it. It includes all of those. Medically, Um, as I recall, the reason had to do, I think, with a particular strain of that particular flu, or which was, I forgot the strain now. It was 15 years before they found out the strain. Because at that point, I mean, yeah, it's 1933, I think, before they found out which would identify the strain. Uh, it's in the book, but I don't remember. but I think it had to do with something on those levels, and also it had to do with the conditions of immigrants. I said that were the heaviest populated that was
Mhm.
affected. Their living conditions, the crowded living conditions, is really what fed that percentage wise for them, and not just and we could say first generation. A lot of poor white folks were in crowded conditions is what led to it. Now, African Americans are in crowded conditions also. I mean, so, but I think then we're getting into the strain. I don't. I have to read the book again to really detail that.
We're
But
historians, not scientists.
oh yes, 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 yes.
I do want to open it up to the audience, but before that, I would just like to ask, transitioning from this book into what you're working on now, what's going ahead, and maybe what did you maybe learn in the process of writing Black biographies of the Lower Delaware Valley that has helped you in your current and ongoing publications?
Yeah, right. Well, the um, the book that I'm writing now, being published now in the next couple of weeks, will be out. Um, African Americans, Camp William Penn, and the Civil War. Much of that I had written prior to Black biographies. A couple of those chapters from my doctoral dissertation, which was a history of Camp William Penn. I did a social history of Camp William Penn. I've added subsequently another chapter. I have two, I think, two other chapters in there, but it is an up to date. It's an updated uh, 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 um, some of those various chapters. One on African Americans and the Battle of Gettysburg, Black Pennsylvanians in the Battle of Gettysburg, um, for example, um, and um, and then the whole Camp William Penn um, social frameworks, talking about uniformed and non-uniform personnel, and the differences between the enlisted men and the officers and the um, kind of even among officers there are ethnic kind of issues going on with some of them, and then the in a camp, for example, Camp William Penn, you have the camp. Some of these people are permanently staffed there. They have permanent staff, but then the others are preparing just to get their troops together so that they can go south. Those will be regimental command. So you have command staff, post commanders, regimental commanders. Who's in charge? Who's in charge of this man? Um, and she had those issues going on. Talk about that too, really. I mean, so that's you have those issues happening even among officers. um, and some officers are prone to more Irish than German kinds of say affiliations, and yeah, those issues going on too. I mean, so among the listed men, I mean, my goodness, what's a good Saturday night brawl? So it's not payday, but um, there's issues, of course, with it. So we talk about the interaction. We talk about the women. We talk about the women who come there, the girlfriends, the wives, the Harriet Tubman who visit the camp. And one interesting thing, let me just say this: one interesting thing that you will read about in that chapter on camp operations is how the regimental commanders and the enlisted men came together as a force to defend black women who had been accused of being unladylike, to use a better word for it. And they stood up and they said, "These women are good women. They are wives. They are daughters. They are," and there's a whole discussion about that. As one moment, those white officers came together with their black enlisted men to to defend a black woman. That's a really great moment there. But anyway, so that's what that's looking at, that particular book, and I like I said, it in fact um, is more older in my mind than Black Biographies. Mhm.
Thank you so much. I do see we have some questions from the Q&A already.
Okay.
Full disclosure to everybody in the audience, I haven't done a webinar type thing before, so this is new to me. So if I click a wrong button, my apologies. But there's an option to answer the questions live, so we're going to try that. But just in
Okay.
case it disappears somewhere, the first one is asking, is your dissertation on Camp William Penn online?
I
Oh, I
believe
think I
it's
hit done.
you can access that. Yes, but wait for the book. Wait for the book because it's going to be uh the book is better. Look, um, when I wrote that dissertation, like most people when they write that, that's my early. You know what I mean? You look at that, you say, "Oh, you know." I mean, those of us who have written them, I mean, 30 years later, blah blah. You know, those moments, happen. Um, and of course, I said there's been some updated kinds of things going on. And, you know, let me say this. Look, I didn't go to college till I was almost 40 years old, right? I was a factory worker up to that time. I was a supervisor at Fleer Baseball Company, uh,
Really?
Fleer Baseball Card Company. Yeah, I was a lab technician. I was a meat cutter. I was a merchant seaman. For a number of years, who circumnavigated the globe on my first voyage, uh, and so I've done a lot before I went to college. So I feel like I guess like what's his name? Wrote oh, O. Henry. O. Henry wrote about the anyway, I'm not going to even try to I'm having a brain freeze right now. But anyway, some of these writers who were workers before they were writers um who I always kind of like gravitate toward. Who I'm thinking about Jack London. Jack London? Jack London, for example. Yeah. But anyway, so I was, so I consider myself to be a factory writer when I'm doing my history, and I relate to the workers. I relate to the work those people that's doing the work. That now, for example, and I always make this argument, like when Henry Louis Gates is doing the genealogy series. I would like for him to walk up to a crossing guard who nobody, you know what I mean? And then just unfold this fantastic and do a person that's an ordinary person, not a non-celebrity. That's my kind of focus.
When you were writing this, I Black Biographies, you mentioned using primary sources, looking into the everyday people. Did you find did you find that to be difficult, and what were some of the limitations with that? I imagine specifically researching African Americans, it's a lot of maybe not getting their perspective in the primary sources. I'm thinking like white newspapers, for instance, but just things like that. What were some of the limitations, or what was anything that was, I guess, easier to access than you expected, if anything?
Mhm. Right. Um, I guess you could almost say when you classify these primary sources, like at the National Archives, for example, if you start looking at pension files of military veterans, you begin to just find all kinds of uh, information, um, uh, especially when people were applying for pensions, for example, and they were challenged. They had proved that you are related to this person. Who is your grandfather? And then they go interview the grandfather, and he gives the whole family history and those kinds of things. I found, for example, a copy of my some of my ancestors' a marriage certificate that was they had to prove they were married in order for the pension to take place. And this is actually an uncle of my great grandfather, um, um, uh, uh, a great uncle of my father. Um, at any rate, so those kinds of things is what I'm saying. You find in the pension files where people have to submit evidence of, and that stuff is still there. That's an amazing thing. Now, however, since COVID, all of that access to those kinds of, so we talk about like difficulties of access. Now you have to um, make an appointment, and it's a gee whiz. And today's it's a different story now. I don't know if you are able to effectively conduct. I don't think it's easy now, as easy as it was then, especially if we're dealing with access to federal institutions. Um, State institutions are still very accessible. County archives and historical societies are still open to us. Um, uh, but we have challenges elsewhere. So now we're talking about a different era of doing research. It's a different era of research. Um, And one of the things that I've noticed in this now is that there's so many research papers coming out on the Black church and slavery, and I just it's amazing. Uh, that's something I don't know if anybody has been paying attention to, but I get an idea of what's being. Uh, I think today's politics is affecting much of how people are doing their research now, because doing research now, um, you might even ask a. I think people have to guard themselves now more, and so now, having said all of that, there are still voluminous kinds of ways to access information. You start with the family research, family research. I want to say family research channel, a family research organization, which is the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And so you can do genealogy research there. Very helpful. In fact, sometimes comparing them to Ancestry.com, I can look at them and I have found, for example, when I was researching Maggie Elias, I went on family research and located her. I located her a record from when she was a teacher, like in 1869, as I think she's 17 years old, her first teaching gig, and so she was working with the Freedman School Bureau, Freedmen's Bureau School System. They had their structure to the Freedmen Bureau had a lot to do with structuring these freedmen schools and throughout the South following the Civil War. And so in Delaware, um, they had supported, along with Delaware organizations, the establishment of these various schools, and she taught at one of them. And so I was able to locate her records, her teaching records, the month and what she taught, and how many students she had, and uh, so forth. You know, and you get the whole record for like a whole year that she taught there. You know, each month you got so those kinds of things free right there. And but you go to Ancestry.com, that doesn't necessarily pop up, or what pops up on Ancestry.com won't pop up on the other. So you have, what do you call it, a mix and match or something like that, or pick and choose, or use everything you can. Okay. Then there's newspapers.com. Gee whiz, you can access so many kinds of um, uh, 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 um, issues. Each person that I've ever done, I've used all of those sources. You can't go, you can't rely on Google anymore. We used to say when Google first came out, we used to laugh at it, and might be showing my age, but uh, that wouldn't be hard to do. But the when Google first came out, it was ridiculed as being, I'm sorry, Wikipedia. Excuse me, Wikipedia. When it first came out, it was disregarded as being weak and unreliable. But now Google is, in many ways, has shaped that. Um, I Google, for example, if I Google my um, uh, other name, my African name, Weusi Msafiri, if I Googled that 2 years ago, I would get a nice kind of like detailed kind of like layout about, what I had been doing. But now it's a whole different scaled down. Ooh, wow. Say, wow, okay. But you can still, of course, access stuff in newspapers.com. That's still operative right now in many. And some using, I'm saying that there's other databases. There's a lot of other databases. I just name a couple. We could have a whole discussion on that because there's others. You got your community, you got your county historical societies. And we have the New Jersey Archives in Trenton. They have an online service, and then you go up there as well, and all of these things. So we still have those availabilities to do good work. It's just that one particular aspect of it at that federal level now, that's a real that hurts though. That really hurts. And because COVID did a lot of that. COVID sank the archives. I mean, after that, it was a wrap. I had a friend in D.C. I was trying to set him up as a business to be able to even do access data, access primary sources for scholars. As a business, and uh, but anyway, so that's what that looks like now. With I think some of the difficulties and some of the pluses and the minuses of doing research these days.
Thank you. I'm gonna pull up. I see a couple more questions. The one is, can you speak some more on the denial of the vote to Black people and women in New Jersey?
Okay, right. Interesting. Yes. Well, let's start with this. Uh, Firstly, we mentioned that they lost the vote in 1807. All right. 1844, it becomes that Jacksonian principle of just need to be white. You don't need to be wealthy. Okay. And a male. You had to be a wealthy male, white male of age, of course, with the required residency of time and that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is this: after the Civil War in the South, following the defeat of the Confederacy, troops were placed there to guard the rights of the newly freed African Americans. So what happens is they are already voting. This is when we begin to get African Americans in Congress, in state offices in the South, county offices, mayors, and this kind of thing, because African Americans are going to the polls in the South when they're not going to the polls in the North. Okay, interesting kind of thing there, where they're not voting where freedom was, but they are voting where freedom wasn't. So in 1868, for example, we get the election of um, Ulysses S. Grant, largely with the support of the black vote. He's a Republican, and largely with the support of the black vote. Now, African Americans in New Jersey are not voting until when? Passage of the 15th Amendment in 1870. All right, you have this now. Who was going to support the 15th Amendment became very controversial. Women on each side of the question, black and white, right? To Harriet Tubman says no. Um, Men and women are nobody. That kind of. I don't mean to reduce, but she supported the fact she was against passing the 15th Amendment without the vote of women being included. Okay, you get other folks on the other side of the question. I mean, Francis Allen Watkins Harper, those kind of folks. They're saying, "Hey, no, get our men in there. This is about because that was on the docket. That's what Congress was asking for. Passage of the vote for all not based on gender or not based on race, and so they supported. So you had both sides of the argument, and uh, 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 Henrietta Crawford at the time. This is 2 years after she makes that grand stand with the rest of those women. There's four black women and those 151 white women, and they do that mock vote in Vineland, which is 1868. Um, uh, uh, I think Henrietta. I don't know because I don't see any statement on it. I like to think that she was on the side of passage of the 15th Amendment. Um, but at any rate, it was quite a divisive thing. Um, but most African Americans supported it, men and women, the passage of the 15th Amendment. You see.
I'm glad you mentioned the bit with Harriet Tubman and her being against it unless women got the vote too, because I know that leading up to the 19th Amendment and white women's right to vote, a big controversy with white women's suffrage was, oh well, some women didn't want it because we can just depend on your husbands, your brothers, your fathers. So I was curious if and to what extent that sentiment was
Okay,
in the African
good point.
American community with women.
Good point. Because that was another situation too. You had some of the white suffragists and the black suffragists. There was a big split there, right? Um, in fact, we wind up with the two organizations. I think um, the American Women's Suffrage Movement. I'm getting or the National Women's Suffrage Movement. Um, and because of that. It's a spinoff from that. It is so it's the American women's suffrage movement that becomes more conservative, um, and the national becomes more progressive in terms of their overall politics. Because those conservatives began to also argue, like, "Hey, should a black man vote before a white woman?" I mean, it's absurd. I mean, they started even reaching those kinds of like crazy uh, fringe um, argument. Actually, wasn't so fringe, really. Um, but that argument certainly spawned itself within the women's movement, and so the women's movement itself, really, we have that kind of merging and trying, uh, uh, um, I don't want to say it's kind of like struggle back and forth all the way up until we get to the 1960s and uh, into that period. Um, and so we talk about the waves of feminism. Um, and so I think we can look at those women there in 1860. Well, that's getting off the point. But anyway, the waves of feminism a certain plays itself into how that um, split among women occur. And still, it's still some of that still here. Some of that's still here. I mean, not all white women are comfortable with Black Lives Matter. There are those who say race shouldn't. So we still have those vestiges of those arguments, but that's when that spawned that argument. I really gave life force to that argument over the 15th Amendment. Yes, indeed. So, uh, um, did I move too far from the question? Um,
No, I think you answered it perfectly, so thank you.
okay.
Our Q&A is still open for everybody. I do have not a question, but a comment. I share your sympathy for working class origins. Thank you for your interest in these histories.
Oh, my pleasure.
Right. I'm not sure if anybody else has any questions. I believe all mine are answered. I was taking notes.
Okay.
But if that's all for everybody, thank you, Dr. James Johnson, for joining us. This has been absolutely wonderful. I'm very much looking forward to reading the book now and getting, especially with those teasers.
Okay.
Now I need to know. And
Yes,
if
indeed.
anybody else wants to get a copy, they are available at Barnes and Noble. They're also available on Amazon. And then this copy will be here at the Lummis Library for anybody who comes in to do research. Dr. Johnson, is there anything else from you?
Well, I would just like to say that I hope everyone was able to get something out of this that is usable, and I appreciate being your speaker in this series. And thank you very much for having me here.
Of course, we're very grateful to have you. So, and thank you everybody for attending. This will be recorded, uploaded to our YouTube channel for anybody to tune in.
Okay.
And thank you again.
All right. Bye bye.